Absolute Radio 70s.
Hello, I'm Chris Martin, and this hour on Absolute Radio 70s, an archive interview from 2012 as I sat down with Jeff Lynne from ELO.
Sun is shining in the sky.
So this is Absolute Radio. It's Chris Martin here, joined in the studio by Jeff Lynne. Hello.
Hello there.
And welcome, sir. A pleasure and a privilege to have you in.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
We've got you in for two very good reasons, and they're both records. So we're going to have a good chat about those. Two new albums, a solo record, Long Wave, which is tribute to some of the songs that originally inspired you, so I've been told. And also released new versions of Mr. Blue Sky and all the big hits in a fantastic little compilation. And we will talk to you about the re-recordings and the work you've put in on doing that in just a little bit. But first of all, I found a quote the other day, and I'm wondering if you're in a position to actually corroborate this one or not for me. It's a quote from Sir Paul McCartney, apparently, saying that had the Beatles continued, they would have sounded like ELO. Have you heard that one?
No, I heard that John said it once.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Because he actually did say that he really liked Showdown, and he played it. He was a DJ in New York. He acted as a DJ one night on a New York radio station, and he played Showdown. He says, "Oh, it's a nice little group, that. I love that. It should have been number one." And he said, "Son of the Beatles," I call them.
Son of the Beatles.
Yeah.
That must have made you glow when you heard that.
Well, it was great, but, you think it's, you obviously want to be your own thing as well, but it was very inspiring to hear that.
Mr. Blue Sky, this is obviously not the first best of ELO, but it's the first one where you've actually rolled up the sleeves, got elbow deep in it and gone, right, this is what I wanted to do. How was it actually? Was that a daunting task?
Well, what it was, I'll tell you, explain the reason why I did it, and then you'll probably understand. For the last few years, I've heard them on the radio, while I've been driving or whatever, or just tuning through, and I go, Mr. Blue Sky, I thought it was better than that. And I was sort of bothered by the woolliness of the sound and the lacking in punch a little bit, and I didn't particularly like the way the vocal sounded, and I decided to re-record it to make it from scratch, like just from a click, and then build it up, layer it up, all play all the instruments like I did on Long Wave. And I played it to my manager, and he said, "Wow, it sounds much better." And and I think it really does. And he said, "Why don't you try another one, see how that goes?" And I said, "I tried Evil Woman, and that came out really good, punchy and tight, and with lots of clarity." That's what was lacking on the old ones, in my opinion. But I still like the old ones, but I'm always disappointed in the sound of them.
Okay. Any fear of the high notes?
None at all. I can still get the high notes, but I can actually get lower as well, because my voice is a little bit deeper, and it's a bit more. It has a bit more thickness to it because I'm an old git.
It just does with age, doesn't it?
You made a fool of me, but them broken dreams have got to end.
Is there any separation in your head between being a musician and being a producer, or is it all just one field that goes into creating the track?
To me, it's all one thing, because I've always been the producer. I've been a producer for like 45 years or something. And so it's always been connected. Everything is to do with production. Because I started out with a little 2-track tape recorder that could bounce from left to right and right to left, a thing called Sound on Sound. And that's how I learned how to make records in my front room.
Wow.
Yeah, it's true. And I even got great drum sounds off a piano stool. And it's just learning how to mic things up. I mean, I'm talking about when I'm like 20. So I've been, doing it all that time, really. It's I just love doing it. I'm maniac for producing and just being in the studio, basically.
Do you know what? I love improvised drum sounds. There's a few records where you can find out later on they're drumming on backs of stalls or drumming on packing cases. I've been involved in a session with another band at some stage where the drums were a hard guitar case and a padded envelope and a kind of metal stick to kind of use that as like a cymbal noise on the padded envelope. And just like the improvisation that goes into these things, it's amazing. Has there been any sort of improvising on the actual records, or is this just the early stage where you're practicing your skill?
No, funny enough, on Mr. Blue Sky itself, the old one, the bell noise is actually a fire extinguisher.
Is it?
Yeah.
Brilliant. You'll have people setting them off all around their offices now. Living Thing on Absolute Radio. You're listening to Jeff Lynne, Mr. Blue Sky. And coming up, we'll find out about his early musical memories and what it was like to work with the Beatles.
Absolute Radio 70s. The Christian O'Connell Breakfast Show.
There's a guy who's kept every one of his nail clippings since 1978. Disgusting. So what weird collections have you got? What have you kept and why? Morning, Christian. My wife has kept my son's umbilical cord. He is now 10. The thing looks like a scab. Oh. Christian, I have a small box in my room that contains all of my baby teeth. I make a point to show them to anyone that visits. My ex-partner's contact lenses.
Oh.
Creepiest ever.
Really?
That's worse than a guy with toenail clippings. These are what she used to have in her eyes.
The Christian O'Connell Breakfast Show. Absolute Radio 70s.
The city streets are empty now. The lights don't shine no more. And so the songs are.
How much would you say the Beatles taught you about songwriting and production? Just with an attentive ear to them, you can learn so many things.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the Beatles, obviously, I would think was the greatest group, and innovative and fantastic. And also helped along by George Martin, of course, and Jeff Emmerich. And I think you learn a lot, but, I learn a lot from lots of different sources, like, for instance, Roy Orbison.
Yeah. And
it's all the people I love I ended up working with, which is fantastic. So my influences actually became my friends. And so, I would be producing them. So suddenly, all the stuff I'd learnt from them, I could give it back to them.
So being able to work with your influences has led to being able to work with the Beatles back catalogue and do the anthology. And there's some incredible stuff in there. What was it like actually being able to get into that and do that?
It was really scary because the track that I was asked to work on was Free as a Bird, which was a great song. I loved it. But it was on a cassette. That was an old cassette that John had done on top of the piano on a Walkman, So it's just one of those all glued together. The piano is stuck to the vocal. So to get that vocal out above the whole Beatles group, it was really difficult. It was almost impossible. And
how did you do it?
I don't know. No, actually, to be honest, Paul helped a lot with that because he ghosted underneath John's voice, which really helped the voice have body to it, as opposed to the little Walkman sound, and it gave a little bit more depth. And it made it more audible in the track. And of course, I got all the rest of the Beatles to play normally, like drums, bass, and guitar. And then George put the slide lead guitar on. And they played rhythm guitar, and it was just a wonderful experience, except we still hadn't got John on there yet, at first. And just got the track, and it sounded great. And then, so putting John in, I had to fly John in from a sampler, really.
Yeah.
That's the only way it could be done, because it wasn't in time, the cassette. It was just written, as it, he just wrote it on the piano. And you don't bother about the time, really, when you're writing it. And so that was really hard, and it was it was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. But it was fantastic when I got it finished, and it was lovely because Paul, when we all sat back and listened to the final thing, Paul he came and gave me a big hug and he says, "Well done, Jeff, you've done it." So that was pretty good, marvellous.
So going back, obviously, I guess you were listening to, just like everybody else was listening to the Beatles, but on this new album, Long Wave, a nod to the songs that came into your life through the family radio, so it says in the liner notes. Paint a picture for me. What was it like at home? Was the radio central to things?
The radio was absolute central to everything because my dad was a bit of a music nutter, and he'd have it on all day long on the weekends and all night long on the evening. So I was always bombarded with it, whether you wanted it or not, because it's only a small house and you've got to have it whether you like it or not. And I did actually not like some of that kind of style in those days.
Yeah.
The kind of show tunes, they used to frighten me really because they were too complicated. I just didn't understand them,
What was it, the orchestration side of it?
Yeah. You got it. The arrangements were too just grand for me to understand.
But it's one of those things where I suppose it's come out later on in your music. Some of the tracks on this album, particularly I think the first one that's leaping to mind, now you've just said that, is Beyond the Sea, which is probably the most complicated. Tell us about that one.
That was so hard to do. That was probably the hardest one of the lot to learn. What I do, I don't read music, so I have to just study the record and listen to it like about 100 times to try and get it, until I just pick out the lead guitar, the rhythm guitar part. That's the main guide I've got. And so I put a click down, play the rhythm guitar to it, and then I gradually layer everything on, like bass, drums, piano, guitar, keyboards and strings or whatever, and vocals and harmonies. And I do it all myself. I just love being a one-man band. Somewhere, bye-bye sailing.
Beyond the Sea from Jeff's new solo album, Long Wave. More to come from that album, plus more ELO greats after one of Jeff's other bands featuring George Harrison, Bob Dylan, Tom Petty and Roy Orbison. Here's the Travelling Wilburys and Handle With Care.
Being beat up and battered around, being sent up and I've been shut down.
This is Absolute Radio 70s.
Absolute Radio 70s. Here's another bonus song because you're listening through an Absolute Radio account. This is Absolute Radio 70s.
The home of James Brown, Steely Dan, and the Bee Gees.
Hello, how are you? Telephone line, give me some time.
Telephone line from the new album Mr. Blue Sky, the best of ELO. We're in conversation with Jeff Lynne. We'll talk more about that album in just a couple of minutes. But first we're discussing his new solo album of covers, Long Wave. Also on there, a track by Charlie Chaplin. Now this is brand new to me. I didn't know he was someone who's sort of famous for creating silent movies was involved with music making.
Totally amazing. What a brilliant guy, really, because he's written some more than half a dozen great tunes that I know of. And I don't know how much of it he wrote. You know, he did collaborate with people on it. There were about 4 writers of Smile. And I just love the simplicity of it, and it's just so uplifting and simple.
Is there any track on this album you can actually remember vividly the very first time you heard it? A song that had so much impact?
I can remember it for the wrong reasons, because it had negative impact.
Really?
Was If I Loved You, which is the second track on the album. I used to think, God, that's so complicated. My dad would say, oh, Richard Rodgers, he's the guy. And I'd be like very young. I didn't know how to play it, of course. And I'd just go, I don't understand what you mean. It's so complicated and grown up and fiddly. I don't get it. Anyway, I learned to play when I was about 15, so it was about a few years after that when I learned to play. And I still didn't know how to play anything like that because the arrangements were still too complicated for me. So just about 2 years ago, I actually sat down and did me thing where I listened to it 100 times and finally figure out the rhythm guitar part and don't listen to all this stuff and just lay it down really simple and then put the bass on again and build it all up. And then all the tracks like strings and everything, and then go and try and sing it. And that was the scariest thing. I was frightened of that bugger. It was really awfully difficult. But I actually did it, and it wasn't easy at all. And I went in to listen in the control room for my first take, and I was dreading it actually. But when I actually heard it, it wasn't too bad. So I got it in about 10 takes. I got it. I was really proud of it, because it was really something I was desperate to do, because I'd grown to love it. Once I'd learnt the chords how they really went and got rid of all the big grandioso stuff all over it, it was very simple and melodic.
If I loved you,
So which of the tracks on this album do you think you've created the most change to and have brought up to scratch in the way that you thought most? Personally, I thought Evil Woman, the guitars on that one seem a lot more fluid and a lot more to the front, and I quite like that.
They are, yeah. They're all a big improvement, I think, sound-wise, because they have, like I say, they are punchier and with more clarity. And I wouldn't say which is my favourite one of those.
It's like asking for your favourite kids, isn't it? Sorry.
I suppose Mr. Blue Sky is my favourite one I've written, and I like the sound of it now much better than I did.
What else have we got coming up in the near future? Are we going to be able to find out any more things before Christmas about you?
Well, not really before Christmas. I have got an album of new songs that I've got 8 finished, and I probably need 3 more. They're all brand new, and it's slightly different from what I've done before.
What kind of angle are you coming at it from?
It's difficult to say. It's like they are slightly different. I think maybe it's less is more, a bit of that thing. Not quite so big, not quite so full.
Not so many layers.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. Well, we look forward to hearing those. Jeff,
thank you.
Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.